Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Authentic Info Podcast. I'm your host, Admar Sandeljo. In this episode, we are looking at the extension made by former President Zuma to continue to stay in Russia for medical reasons. You remember I covered, there's an episode where I was talking about the case which the Department of Correctional Services has lost. You know, they made an appeal to the Constitutional Court for the Constitutional Court to overturn the judgment by the Supreme Court of Appeal, and they lost. Now, in that case, the Department of Correctional Services wanted to make sure that the decision which they made that was to afford former President Zuma medical parole after serving only 2 months of his 15 months jail term to be correct, and then they were judged, or it was found to be incorrect and it lacked facts. So they lost that case, although they say that they are still looking into that judgment. They are still trying to understand the judgment. Now, it is upon the National Commissioner of the Department of Correctional Services, Mr. Tubakale, to make sure that President Zuma goes back to Escort prison to serve the remainder of his sentence. Now, there has been analytics around this topic where some legal experts are of the view that there's no need whatsoever for President Zuma to come back from Russia and go to serve a prison sentence, because he's not the one who afforded himself a medical parole. So they are of the view that he has served, and that judgment comes way later, after he has already signed with the community corrections, which is a component of the Department of Correctional Services that looks into people who are serving their sentence on parole, because parole itself is part of the sentence. A person must serve until the last day of their sentence. That is, for example, in the case of Zuma, he was sentenced for 15 months. It means that even though he only served 2 months in prison and was given medical parole, which was signed by the former National Commissioner Arthur Fraser, it means that he served the remaining 13 months of the 15-month sentence at home, because he was automatically, obviously signing, and then he was being monitored by the Department of Correctional Services, the component of community corrections, which is part of serving a sentence, by the way. So the judgment needs some careful scrutiny so that people can understand the position of the department when it comes to community corrections and serving parole, because parole is part of a sentence. It doesn't mean that a person is no longer serving a sentence, because that person, there are conditions that he has to follow and that he has to live by. So they have to make sure that he signs, they have to make sure that he doesn't go to certain areas, and he must alert the Department of Correctional Services of his movements. For example, attending funerals which are far from home or from the jurisdiction where he was only allowed not to go outside of. So President Zuma, after the news were broken, we learned that he is in Russia for medical reasons. And currently he has, on this week, extended his stay in Russia. Now, what does this mean? It means that even if the Department of Correctional Services are of the view that they want to honor and respect the decision of the Constitutional Court by making sure that President Zuma goes back to prison to serve a new term, which is it will be a new term because he has already served the 15 months of the sentence which he was given by the court in Pietermaritzburg. So it's going to be challenging, and it has never been seen in history where the decision of the Department of Correctional Services comes to affect an inmate who has already served a sentence, who, by the way, did not afford themselves such an opportunity or medical parole or whatever parole. So in this case, the department needs to look into the judgment, of course, and they also need to check the validity of the medical parole which was given to President Zuma. Another question people were posing is that how come did President Zuma go outside the country? Now, you'll understand that the sentence was in 2021, and he is now in Russia because he obviously has all the access, and he is no longer a flight risk because there's no other case against him, and the conditions of his parole are no longer applying since he has served the 15 months. Because you will remember he was out, or I think it was on the first week of December 2021. So when you count on the first week of December 2022, that's already 12 months, which means in January he had served 13 months outside prison. So he was done this year with that sentence. So I don't know how the Department of Correctional Services is going to interpret the judgment, and how are they going to interpret the Correctional Services Act 111 to align with the judgment, or to make sure to give them a decision. Information on how, or to inform them on how to arrive into a decision to either make sure that Zuma goes back to prison, or to make sure to try and present to the court to say he has served. Because that is what the act says when it comes to serving a prison term outside of court in the name of, outside of a prison, in the name of parole. So you remember that there was a civil unrest after the arrest of President Zuma. We saw this affecting some parts of Gauteng and some parts of KwaZulu-Natal. Malls were burnt, shops were looted, people were arrested. It was chaos. There was an unrest. And there were people who were accused of instigating that unrest. People like Ngizwe Mkuno, people like Advocate Ike Khumalo, were some of the people who are arrested and accused of instigating or being on the forefront of giving intelligence that led to that unrest. Now, there are fears, or there is a fear, that if the Department of Correctional Services agrees with the Concord judgment and decides to take Zuma back to prison, there might be another unrest. I will see people saying that the president that doesn't love this country, and the ANC is no longer protecting their own, like we know political parties to do. So it's quite questionable to say a former head of state is sent to prison and is about to be sent to prison for the second time, and his political party is saying nothing. But we also need to understand that this is a rule of law. It's not some political tactics. Zuma did not attend or appear in the Zondo Commission after he failed to recuse Zondo as a presiding officer in that commission, saying that is very biased. So he said he's not going to attend, and he was summoned to court and then was charged of contempt of court and sentenced to 15 months in prison. This could happen to anyone. People are always being charged of contempt of court, and they serve or they pay whatever fine that might be. So in the case of President Zuma, we see a lot of the Zulu people or people of his tribe threatening that if you want to see worse than what we saw in July 2021, we must let them arrest President Zuma. So July again in 2023, there is a decision that might lead us to that direction. And in honoring and respecting the law, if the Department of Correctional Services sees it fit that they might have made a mistake in giving Zuma medical parole and they decide that they must come back, of which I think it won't happen, then the state must be ready. We have seen some journalists interviewing our president to ask him whether he's going to protect President Zuma, whether the ANC is going to protect President Zuma. And he said, what type of question is that? Which means there's no way that the ANC is going to be against the Concord judgment. They are going to take a stance and say that they respect the law. Another interviewer or journalist asked the president of whether the state is ready in terms of security in case the unrest erupts. So he said that the state is ready, and if needs be, the SAPS will be the ones who go to Zuma's place and apprehend him to back to Escort prison. But you will know that it is not the duty of the SAPS unless if the Department of Correctional Services has failed, because in community corrections, the Department of Correctional Services has a duty in terms of the Correctional Services Act to rearrest people who are who are serving parole in case they violate the conditions of their parole. It is a duty of the Department of Correctional Services through community corrections to rearrest such a person. Now, there's no way that we can jump, or the state can jump and use the police, because the Department of Correctional Services must first send their officials to go and rearrest President Zuma, and then he must go back and serve the remainder of his sentence. A lot of people were quite surprised after President Zuma was given medical parole, because they say that most of their relatives are in prison and they are very sick, and they saw the president attending some events after that to show that it's not that sick compared to their relatives. So they were saying that the Department of Correctional Services was not fair. Another thing is that they asked why did a person like a national commissioner run away after giving the former president that medical parole, and why was it considered first before the others? Because they say that there's a backlog when it comes to medical parole and looking into the cases, for example, of lifers. So a lot of questions have been raised, and there were no answers. Now, another problem that might arise is that the current National Commissioner of the Department of Correctional Services, Mr. Tobakal, is not the one who gave Zuma medical parole. But now he must answer, he must account, and he must go back and check whether everything was followed, and he must make a decision as a National Commissioner to say this parole, in this parole everything was followed and the inmate qualified. And if he sees otherwise, it is his duty again to give an instruction to Escort prison to say they must go and rearrest President Zuma as soon as he comes back. But another question is, what if he keeps extending his stay? You want to see where this all goes. He's waiting maybe for the decision of the Department of Correctional Services, whether they're going to rearrest him or they're going to say that he has served his sentence. So it's quite questionable, and we are waiting to see what's going to happen in this case of former President Zuma. Another thing is that if we extend this stay, we know that there are cases where the state has failed to arrest people who are abroad. We have seen this with the Guptas. The Guptas were seen in Dubai, in Brazil, and wherever. And the state failed to arrest them. We have seen this in the case of the controversial Prophet Bushiri from Malawi. After he was supposed to appear in court, he disappeared, and now we see him in television, is in China. But there seems like the state is not making any means to arrest him or to bring him back to face his charges in South Africa. So are they going to do it with President Zuma? What if when he comes back, when he left Russia, he might leave Russia and go and stay with Duduzane in Dubai? So are we going to let him go just like that? And how strong is our security when it comes to extradition? Are they going to be able to go and fetch him from abroad while we failed to arrest people like Bushiri? We failed to arrest people like, the Guptas, and they are still doing business elsewhere. And it is known that these guys are seen in these airports, they are seen in these places, and there's nothing happening. So it's our law becoming weaker and weaker. It's the SAPS becoming more weak and weak. And we haven't seen any statement from the Minister of Correctional Service, Mr. Ronald Lamola, because he is expected maybe to put pressure on the Department of Correctional Services to make sure that they arrive into a decision and make sure that the state is satisfied with such a decision. So this is still a developing story. I'm going to follow up on it and see where it all goes. And I hope that the Department of Correctional Services follow the guidelines that are there, or the regulations that are provided for by the Correctional Services Act 111 of 1998 as amended, and make sure that they don't repeat the same things. Because in positions like that one of Mr. Tobachal, it's very difficult because you have to first clean the mess of the previous leader or occupant of such an office. Because when you are there, you represent an office. You don't represent yourself or the interests of your political party or someone who has given you that position. So it's very difficult because he is now faced with cases like this one of President Zuma. And when you're not strong, you can even resign, because it's very, very difficult. It will be very difficult for him. Let's say he decides that former President Zuma must be rearrested. This means that he might have started war against the Zulu tribe. And where is he going to live? Because the Zulus are everywhere. And if he doesn't do that, it means that it will be war against the people who expect him to arrive into a decision or conclusion that will make them see former President Zuma back in prison. Because I know that there are people who are ready to see former President Zuma rot in jail. But we've seen the EFF defending President Zuma. We've seen the CIC Julius Malema saying that it's enough. The man is old. There's no need for him to go and live his last days in prison. He has done a lot for South Africa. And as a head of state, it's quite embarrassing to see him serving a sentence in prison. And he also says that even himself, Zuma has done worse on himself, on the CIC, Julius Malema, but he doesn't expect anything worse than what he has went through. He says that he has lost power. A man who loses power as a president or in politics has lost everything. So taking him to prison, it makes things worse. So he is of the view that there is no need to take him back to prison. That 2 months, that taste of prison is enough, and they must let the man rest. So I am of the view that there must be a careful analysis into the Concord judgment, and whatever informs the decision of towards or on the National Commissioner of the Department of Correctional Services must be the law that anyone could follow to arrive into such a decision. It must not be informed by the desire of some seniors in the ANC or even the president to see President Zuma suffering. Because the ANC, for failing to protect President Zuma, they are setting a precedent. We are going to see a lot of senior ANC or high-profile lead politicians in the ANC going to jail after what happened to President Zuma. They think they are doing worse, but they are creating a road that leads to prison for all of them, because there's no one who is clean. There are scandals on top of heads of these ANC leaders. And imagine defending yourself without power. Because had Zuma, let's say Zuma was still a president, all these things were not going to happen. So they are happening because he has lost power. And in the case of President Ramaphosa, he's not going to be an ANC leader forever. There will be time where he's also going to lose power. And if the ANC doesn't back him up, the cases that he has from Marikana, Phala, and all that, they might come back and haunt him. So if they fail to protect themselves, I'm not saying that they must commit crime as ANC politicians, and after committing crime, they know that their party will protect them. But I'm saying that it has been the culture of political parties to protect their own. So we've seen an off-ramp when it comes to President Zuma. No one wants to be on his side, excluding his foundation. So, and few members who are not benefiting currently, but they're ANC members. So I think these guys must be careful on what they are doing, especially to these old men. And I'm not saying that we must forsake the rule of law. The rule of law must be followed, but people must not be pressured to arrive into decisions that seeks to satisfy the desire of their seniors. So thank you for watching this episode. I'm Admas Andilechau. This is Authentic Info Podcast. Please subscribe, hit the notification bell, like, share with family and friends, share this link on your WhatsApp status, on your Instagram, Twitter. Let's refer friends and family members to view this podcast. And please comment and help me grow with you. Thank you.